The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, whispering drizzle that blurred the edges of the world outside. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I approached the old motel, its flickering neon sign casting a sickly glow through the gloom. The place looked like it had seen better days. Peeling paint, crooked shutters, and a faded sign that barely clung to the wall. It was the kind of place you might pass by without a second glance, but tonight it felt like the only option. I pushed open the door, its hinges groaning softly in protest. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something stale, almost metallic. The dim hallway stretched out before me, lit by flickering bulbs that seemed to struggle against the darkness. I moved toward the front desk, where a sleepy-looking clerk barely looked up from her magazine. "Room 7, I said softly, handing over my ID. She nodded and handed me a key attached to a worn plastic tag. No questions, no fuss, just the faintest hint of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As I stepped into the corridor, I noticed the walls were paper thin, the kind that seemed to whisper secrets if you listened closely enough. My footsteps echoed softly as I made my way down the hall, the flickering lights casting shadows that danced just beyond the edge of vision. I found room 7 at the end, its door slightly ajar, as if inviting me in, or warning me to stay away. The room itself was small and sparse, with a single bed, a battered dresser, and a window that looked out onto the rain-streaked night. I placed my bag on the rickety bedside table and took a moment to breathe. Outside, the rain continued its gentle tap, a lullaby for the restless. That's when I noticed the note taped to the mirror, curled at the edges. I peeled it off carefully and read, "Don't trust the voices. They lie." A chill ran down my spine, though I told myself it was just some local prank or a leftover from a previous guest. Next to it, a small crumpled piece of paper caught my eye. I unfolded it slowly, revealing a Bible passage underlined in shaky handwriting. It was from Psalm 23, but the underline was uneven, almost frantic. I read the words beneath my breath. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." The verse seemed to hang in the air, heavy with an unspoken warning. I chuckled softly, dismissing the strange notes as part of the motel's eccentric charm. I was tired, after all, and the rain's rhythmic patter was starting to lull me into a restless sleep. I settled onto the bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin, and closed my eyes for just a moment. That's when I first heard the faint whispers. At first, they were just barely perceptible, soft, sibilant sounds that seemed to drift through the thin walls. I told myself it was the wind, or perhaps the building settling. But as the hours passed, the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. They curled around the edges of my consciousness, threading through my dreams and tugging at the corners of my mind. In the darkness, I could make out fragments, distorted words, half-formed sentences. "Stay away," one voice hissed, barely more than a breath. "It's not safe." Another, more guttural, murmured, "You shouldn't be here." The voices seemed to come from room 8, directly beside me, yet I knew no one was there. The walls, thin as paper, carried their secrets. I lay there, listening, heart pounding softly in my chest. My mind raced to rationalize, just the wind or my imagination running wild after a long day. But deep inside, a sense of unease settled, cold and persistent. And as the night deepened, the whispers continued, weaving a web of dread that I couldn't quite escape. I wondered if I'd made a mistake, coming here, to this place that seemed to breathe with its own silent, sinister life. But still, I told myself to wait, to see what dawn might bring. Perhaps it was just the old motel's ghosts, nothing more. Yet, in that quiet darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a threshold, and the thin wall between what's real and what's not was beginning to fray. The persistent murmurs. Night after night, the whispers seemed to settle deeper into the fabric of the motel's worn walls. At first, they were faint, almost like the distant rustling of leaves or the faint hum of a radio lost in static. But over time, those sounds grew clearer, more insistent, threading their way into my consciousness as if they had become part of the very air I was breathing. I'd lie in bed, eyes closed, listening to the soft murmurings that seemed to crawl through the thin wall separating room 7 from room 8. It wasn't just noise anymore. It carried a strange weight, a promise, a warning, a secret. The voices spoke in hushed tones, as if sharing confidences I was not meant to hear. Sometimes I could make out fragments. "Come closer," they whispered softly. "We're waiting." Or, more chillingly, "You're not alone." The words slithered into my mind, purling around my thoughts and refusing to let go. Every night, I'd sit upright in bed, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of curiosity and dread. I'd press my ear to the wall, trying to decipher what was real and what was merely my imagination. But the whispers persisted, growing more persistent, more intimate. They seemed to echo in my head long after I had turned off the light, long after I had told myself it was just the old building settling. One particularly restless night, I stood outside room 8, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't quite understand. The door was shut tight, as expected, but I had to see, had to verify if anyone was inside, if someone had been staying there, or if perhaps I was losing my grip on reality. I pressed my hand against the rough wood, feeling the faint vibrations of something unseen, something that was trying to communicate. The room was vacant. The bed was unmade, blankets rumpled as if hurriedly abandoned, and the air inside was stale, untouched by recent footsteps. No sign of life, no furniture displaced, no indication that anyone had been there in recent weeks. Yet the whispers persisted, emanating not from the room itself, but from somewhere beyond. The wall, the very essence of the structure, or perhaps from the darkness within it. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I stepped back, my mind racing to reconcile what I'd heard and seen. It was impossible, I told myself, that anyone was inside. But the whispers, they kept going, like a chorus of unseen voices echoing through the thin barrier, inviting, warning, taunting. Paranoia began to seep into my thoughts. Had I been imagining the voices? Was I losing my grip? Or was something more sinister lurking behind those walls, something that refused to stay buried? The idea that the room was empty, and yet the voices continued, made my stomach churn with unease. That night, I found myself lying awake, listening to the persistent murmurs, trying to distinguish their source. The words were softer now, almost pleading, like a fragile thread pulling me towards something I wasn't meant to see. I wondered if I should leave, if I should pack up and escape this place before whatever was inside it found a way to reach me. But curiosity, mixed with a creeping sense of dread, kept me rooted. I wanted to understand. I needed to know what haunted these walls, what secrets they kept hidden behind their peeling paint and warped wood. The whispers had become a lullaby and a warning, a siren song that beckoned me closer, even as it warned me to stay away. As dawn approached, I lay there, exhausted and haunted. The whispers had faded into silence, at least for now, but the memory of their voices lingered, echoing in my mind, a persistent reminder that something unseen was watching, waiting, and whispering through the wall. And I couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I was becoming part of the story, an unwitting piece in a puzzle far darker than I could comprehend. The descent into dread. I remember the moment clearly, even now, the quiet shift that marked the beginning of something far darker than I'd expected. It started late one night, After I'd spent hours trying to convince myself that the whispers were just my imagination, that the creaks and groans of the old motel walls were normal. But that night, the air felt heavier, thick, with a silent, oppressive weight that pressed against my chest as I sat on the edge of the bed. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed it. Something strange reflected in the mirror above the sink. At first, I thought it was simply my reflection, distorted by the flickering fluorescent light. But then I saw it. Scratched into the foggy glass, faint lines that hadn't been there before. A message, jagged and hurried, etched into the surface with what looked like a fingernail or some sharp object. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. They're still watching. A chill ran through me, and I froze, my eyes fixed on those cruel, uneven words. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were now lingering just behind me, watching from within the walls. My breath caught, but I told myself it was just a trick of the mind. Still, I wiped the mirror furiously, trying to erase the message, but it was there, etched deep, as if the motel itself had carved it into my reflection. That's when I began to notice the whispers, soft, almost inaudible at first, slipping into my consciousness even when I was alone. I'd catch snippets, a voice whispering my name, a faint hiss that seemed to dissolve as I focused on it. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just the tiredness playing tricks. But as the night stretched on, the voices grew more persistent, more insistent. They filled the room now, not just from the walls, but from within my own mind, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear, promises of companionship, hints of truths buried deep. It was as if the silence of the motel had become a conduit, a thin veil between reality and something far darker. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with a life of their own, and I could feel them closing in, pressing against my skin. One night, I decided to test the whispers, to confront whatever it was. I sat in the center of the room, eyes closed, listening intently. The voices responded immediately, a chorus of faint, sibilant whispers swirling around me. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a presence that was neither here nor there, just on the edge of perception. It was then I realized they weren't just voices. They were memories, warnings, perhaps even curses. I tried to convince myself that I was hallucinating, that the old motel's atmosphere was playing tricks on my mind. But then I remembered those scratches on the mirror, the strange note I'd dismissed earlier, and the fact that room 8 had been vacant for weeks. The whispers, the scratches, the shadows, they all pointed to something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. A part of me wanted to leave, to escape this place before whatever it was consumed me entirely. But something held me back, an unshakable feeling that I was already too deep, that I'd crossed a line I couldn't come back from. The whispers now felt like a lullaby, a soft, sinister lullaby promising that I belonged to the darkness, that I was a part of whatever nightmare haunted these walls. And so I stayed, in that dimly lit room that had become both sanctuary and prison. Each night, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, weaving into my dreams and seeping into my waking thoughts. The line between what was real and what was not blurred until I could no longer tell if I was hearing the voices from outside or if they had somehow taken root inside me. That's how it all began, the slow descent into dread, a quiet unraveling of my mind, as the motel's dark influence seeped into every corner of my consciousness. I knew deep down that I wasn't alone, that something was watching, waiting for me to slip further into its grasp. And as the whispers continued to echo through the thin walls, I wondered just how much longer I could hold on to myself before I was swallowed whole. The silence was absolute now, a heavy, oppressive hush that seemed to press against my skin, seeping into every corner of my mind. It was as if the whispers had been swallowed, erased by some unseen force, leaving behind only an echoing emptiness that stretched infinitely around me. I sat there in the darkness of room 7, heart pounding softly in my chest, breath shallow and uneven, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing, or what I had become. For a moment, I thought I might be dreaming, caught in some cruel limbo where the boundaries of reality had dissolved entirely. The faint memories of the whispers, the promises, warnings, the voices that had haunted me for nights, faded into a distant hum, replaced by this suffocating stillness. It was as if the very air was holding its breath, awaiting whatever was to come next. I reached out, trembling slightly, hand hovering in the darkness. My fingertips brushed the cool surface of the wall, and I wondered if I was still truly there, or if I'd somehow been pulled into some endless, unchangeable night. The motel's walls, once thin and fragile, now felt like a barrier I could no longer pierce, no matter how much I strained or listened. A part of me wanted to call out, to scream or cry, just to break the silence and see if anything responded. But I knew better. I knew that the voices, if they ever returned, would only be worse than before. That the silence was, in its own way, more terrifying, because it meant I had crossed some invisible line, one from which there was no return. The rooms around me stood silent too, their shadows unmoving, their secrets forever locked behind those faded walls. I wondered if the other rooms had ever truly been inhabited, or if they too were just echoes, phantoms of a nightmare that refused to end. What had I become to be here, caught in this suspended moment, neither awake nor asleep?
Time itself seemed to distort. Minutes stretched like hours, or perhaps it was the other way around. The silence pressed harder, and I felt a strange disconnection, as if I was drifting outside of myself, observing this slow unraveling. I sensed that whatever was behind the thin walls, whatever had drawn me here, was waiting, watching. And then, suddenly, I thought I heard something, a faint, almost imperceptible shift. A flicker of movement, perhaps, or just the ghost of a whisper trying to pierce the void. But no, it was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the thick silence. The motel was empty again, the darkness unwavering. A part of me wanted to believe I'd escaped, that I'd somehow broken free from whatever grip had held me hostage. But deep down, I knew better. There was no escape from this place, no way to outrun what lurked behind those walls. The whispers had gone quiet, but I could feel them lurking just beneath the surface of my mind, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. In that silence, I realized something profound. The horror wasn't just in the voices or the shadows. It was in the silence itself, an echoing reminder that some things are better left unspoken, some walls better left unbroken. Once broken, they don't just reveal secrets, they swallow you whole. And so, I sat there in that endless quiet, trembling with the knowledge that I was no longer certain if I had escaped, or if I had simply become part of the motel's haunted memory. The line between reality and nightmare blurred into nothingness, and I was left to wonder if this silence would ever lift, or if I had already fallen into the abyss, forever lost behind the wall that once whispered to me in my dreams. In the end, all I could do was wait in the silence, for whatever might come next, or for nothing at all.